Hey, Niels Mahoney here from On Air Coach. We are delighted to be speaking to, well, I know you as Howie Cogan, but professionally you've been Howard Cogan for a long time. Why are you Howard now? Where did that
That's my name. It says it on my driver's license and my birth certificate. Howie's like a nickname for Howard. My mother, when she used to be angry at me, would call me Howard, but when she was happy with me, it was Howie. So
happen?
whatever you like.
Isn't that the best question ever? How did you get your name? That's my name.
Yeah.
It's my name.
On my birth certificate, it was given to me the way it's supposed to be, I guess.
That's a classic. How are things with you there at the minute with the voiceover industry and whatnot? Are you affected at all by it? Because, I mean, you work from home a lot, right?
Yeah, it's people. I go, look, man, I've been in quarantine for 15 years. I mean, in the sense of, we're fortunate. We're in that one industry where you can just walk upstairs or downstairs or down the hall and do your job. So yeah, we're lucky in that respect. But what's there to voice is the question, right? I mean, we all have or not all, but a lot of us have studios. But then the question is, what do you want to do with it?
Well,
what's there to do?
Like a lot of the stuff we get, we don't concentrate on voice work, but we do as a sideline, like most people do. If you have a microphone and a bit of a studio, you'll do the voice work. And most of our stuff is radio commercials. And of course, funnily enough, we're not getting much work in the last couple of weeks. So I'm thinking that when you depend on that, though, for a living, it's a bit of suddenly an abrupt jolt, isn't it? It's kind of, hello, what do I do?
Well, the whole world's been put on pause, right? I mean, it's we're just a small portion of it. There's still some radio advertising. I talked to one of my stations yesterday. My main business is still the radio imaging. So I do work with a bunch of radio stations around the United States. And some are saying, they're just seeing, obviously it's slowed, but they're seeing a transition into different types of advertising. All the immediate now businesses, medical and home delivery stuff. And so they're starting to see a new crop of clients slowly creep into the fold. So it's not completely flattened to zero at this point.
You see, I know you as Howie the Hitman Cogan. That's when we first
That's right.
Stumbled upon each other's existence in LG73 in Vancouver back in 1782 or whatever year it was. I mean, was this back then when you're jocking, right? You're doing the hot hit format on a station like that. Was this something you were thinking, I wouldn't mind getting into the voiceover industry eventually and doing that? Or were you happy doing radio with no thoughts? Because I'm going to even go longer on this one. I remember early 90s, you talking about the internet and saying the internet's the way of the future. That's the way it's going to be. That's the way we're going to be communicating. And I hadn't even heard of the bloody thing at that stage. So was it something you were looking at then, or what was the deal with that?
Two questions. That's two questions, really. One is voiceover. As far as the voiceover goes, no, I never set out to be a voiceover guy. I would, when I was a disc jockey, I would find ways out of the building so the production guy would never see me, so I didn't have to read a commercial. I'd be like, please, God, don't give me any of that. I wasn't good at it. I didn't like it. And I kind of stumbled upon it years later. I started to realize, being a disc jockey and making a living, you get, as you get older, you want to have a family, maybe live in a house and take a vacation and, eat some food and all of that stuff. So you start to realize, okay, well, how can I get to a level where some of that can happen? And that's either you're basically a morning DJ or an afternoon DJ in a massive market. But, you have to climb that ladder. And I think, well, when we met, I was in Vancouver. I did go a market higher up into Toronto on a rock station eventually, but I did evenings and an afternoon drive. But we had Howard Stern in the morning, so I was going nowhere beyond where I was at that point. So around then, I was like, okay, if I can't do this on a good enough sustainable level, I need to look at other options. So that's when I started to look at voiceover, because I had other friends in the business. Jim Conrad was a big voiceover guy in Vancouver. When I was on Rock 101 in Vancouver, CFMI, he came out. He was the guy that sort of convinced me to do it, because I was like, I don't want to do voiceover. And the guy, he's like, dude, your voice is the presentation and everything you do is exactly what they're looking for in the industry. And I'm like, what? So I made a demo. The first one sucked. No agent rep me. Then I went to a studio and worked with them. And then I started getting these beer commercials, which were like, an apathetic, who gives a crap kind of guy, undersell, not trying to hype you. And that's how it sort of took off for me and bled into the what eventually became Jack FM and these other formats. As far as the internet goes, yeah, I was telling people about the internet. And when I lived in Vancouver, right at the time you were there, was when the internet started, and it was back then. It was like it was just cool that you could go on to the University of Minnesota's not website. It was like they just connect to their computer with 6 options: library, memos, or whatever it was. That was the internet. There was like 6 nodes in the world, and that's all you could plug into. I would tell people about this, and there's a bunch of musicians. There was Adam Stern and a bunch of guy from the Powder Blues, Tom Lavin. They started one of the first internet providers in Vancouver. And I remember Adam, I was like, dude, this is going to be so cool. And he was setting it up, and he learned Unix, and he was coding it all. And I remember he said to me, he goes, okay, dude, I need you to go home and try and dial in. And I went to my house and I did my little modem, and I logged into the internet through this, ISP for the first time, and it was cool, and that's how it all started.
World Wide Web.
World Wide Web, and I like, this shit's gonna be cool. So look, I missed that wave. I never really became. I was a tech journalist. There was a small portion of my career where I was so into that I became. Yeah, I did a syndicated radio thing. I think I had a couple of names. It was Digital Survival Guide and Cyberbreak. Back before all those tech videos on YouTube became cool, I was doing it on radio. And I remember interviewing all these guys. And like one guy he quit Microsoft. He was in his garage and he was telling me about this thing he started called Hotmail. And I'm like, dude, Hotmail, so what? You don't need Eudora? You could just get mail on like a web page? And he's like, yeah, it's going to be big. And I'm like,
he didn't.
I should have just hung up the phone and cut the guy a check for like $2,000, and I would have been a billionaire by now. Yeah, for sure. I missed all of that. I was too busy trying to be an actual journalist and not an investor. But all of these guys I was talking to on the ground floor, and I saw that coming. And I would tell people, like you, I think you believe me, but other guys at the station would roll their eyes and go, dude, you're an idiot. Put the TV on.
Well, the only reason I believed you is because you have this air about you that you don't bullshit, right? That whatever you say, and you mean it. So whenever you spoke, and whether it was you dare check me sometimes, you go, hey, I heard that thing was great. I heard that thing it wasn't so great because of this. I go, all right, I'll take that because you actually mean it and you put a bit of thought into it. And I think that's one of the reasons I would have believed you. And it brings me back to why you got the Jack gig. You mightn't have known at the time, but with your tone of voice, it always sounded sarcastic, no matter what you were saying. You could say, "Hey, great show," and it was like kind of, was it or is it shit? I'm not quite sure. And I think that's kind of why work. And maybe did you clue into that later that actually this is it? This could be a bit of a meal ticket. This thing I have with my voice, this drawl that I can use it for.
Well, that's good. That's a good lesson for everybody, right? Because I might mean good show in my head, and my brain saying, that's a really good show, Nails. That was great. I loved it. And my mouth, it's coming out like, I don't know, is that guy serious or is he, so it is just part of naturally who I am and how I speak. Yeah. But, it's to most of us, whether you're an actor, a disc jockey, a voiceover artist, I mean, that really is the key, is to being able to tap into what that part of you is that you can exploit somewhere else. And that's why, look, I've tried the movie trailers. I can bullshit my way through some reads, but I don't, I'm not the top movie trailer guy. I'm not Don LaFontaine. And if I tried to be, you'd probably laugh at me. It
was a day like no other. Yeah, but whatever, who cares? That'd be yours.
Yeah. World. I don't know, this world. And when they do movie trailers like that one day, maybe I'll get some work in that area. But that's, and if people don't know me and they don't know my radio stuff, sometimes I can BS my way into it. I've done like sports narration, like Liev Schreiber kind of stuff for HBO, where, you're narrating a bit of sports stuff that's a little more sentimental and sincere. But those are people who don't know me. But if they know what I do, it's very difficult. You're so typecast. It's hard to break out of that.
Do you ever want to be on the other side? Do you ever want to be in front of the camera? Is that everything you ever wanted to do?
My front of the camera experience was telethons at radio stations at 2:00 in the morning, right? Put on a tuxedo and give out the phone number. Sure. I mean, I just never, I started off, my dream when I was 5 years old was television. I just was obsessed with TV cameras and television industry. I would go to sporting events and just see where they placed all the cameras. And that was more interesting to me than the sport itself. So television was always my initial passion, but radio was sort of accessible. I grew up in Canada.
Yeah, that's
Ottawa was
right.
my hometown. There's not much Hollywood action up there. So radio is sort of where you can live almost anywhere in the world and you have some sort of accessibility. And back in those days, you could just kind of go down to the station and, intern or weasel your way in and eventually end up with some sort of gainful employment. So radio is more accessible and I just kept following that path.
I remember that.
If that didn't work out, I probably would have gone into television for sure.
I also remember listening to radio as a kid and thinking to myself, I knew some people who were on radio, older than me, friends of my brother, or whatever, and they've got into radio. I thought, wow, that's a really sounds like something that's number one. It's fun because I'm a bit of a show off, like we all are in a little way. I like to show off, and that sounded like a good platform to do it. And maybe it's easy to get into, and it turned out it was. And that's just, for me, that's how radio just became the thing. If it was TV, like you're saying, maybe it would have been TV.
But radio is easy to get into and easy to get out of.
Oh, it's
Right?
way easier to get kicked out of, and they'll repeatedly tell you that, and I'll give you evidence of that. One of my favorite things you did in Vancouver was the Wheel of Misfortune, and it was a feature that you used to do, right? I'm sorry to
I
sound,
forgot about that.
I don't want to sound all wanky about it, but I always remember this because it was the first time I'd seen a bit done on air, where the effects weren't on cart, weren't on reel to reel, weren't on tape somehow, weren't recorded. You actually built a wheel, and the wheel was brought into the studio, and you manually.
I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that was an eye opener for me, because I thought, shit, you can actually really do this stuff without actually just pretending. You can do it.
I don't know if I would take full credit for building it. I think we probably stole it from the Morning Zoo or somebody.
Even better.
Yeah, I don't know if we actually would. I don't remember like going to Home Depot and buying a bunch of wood and saying, God, I'm going to do this the hard way. I was probably lying around somewhere and we said, hey, we should take that and make a bit out of it or something.
Yeah, but the point being, it was the first time I'd seen it actually, because you got to remember, I'd come from Ireland at that point where radio was it was a bit dull. It wasn't great. And I'd come to this nice city, and all of a sudden there's this guy called the Hitman. He's bringing out a Wheel of Misfortune. I'm like, okay, I need to watch this. I need to learn from this. So it was good fun for me at the time, just seeing that actually happen and seeing it progress before radio fell on its arse in Vancouver and everybody got fired. But that's another story.
But that we were there right at the precipice at the end of. Yeah. We were on AM radio doing top 40 in music. Canada was behind a lot of the world because they had heavy regulations, and they forced the top 40 and the hits and the music all on the AM as long as they could, because FM had the better sound quality, more people wanted to listen to it. But it allowed it allowed the AM stations to kind of live on life support just a little bit longer with these regulations. And we were the tip of that. And I remember I think you were gone back to Ireland, but I ended my reign at LG, or my time at LG, at CKLG in Vancouver, when decided it's like, you know what, music's dead on the radio. Let's become a talk station, sort of.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, okay, and they're like, on Fridays on your show, I think I was on the afternoon show at this point, and you need to have like some psychics come in, and there's a couple of psychics, and they're going to come in and do like talk to the audience and tell them their future. I'm like, seriously? And they're like, yes. And so it wasn't like me picking what was on my show. They were telling me this. Yeah. And I remember it'd be like, okay, so we get the psychic here and let's go to Bob on line 2. And the guy calls in, my wife, I don't know what to do. And she tells him the whole thing. And then my job was to go, okay, all right, here's In Excess. And then we'd play like a song in the middle of the talk show. It was just like schizophrenic. We didn't know what to do radio. We're going to kind of do some talk, and then we're going to play a song, and then we're going to go back to talk, and it was awful. And I don't know what that station, I think it's Traffic now or something.
It's still Traffic, yeah. So, but they still play in obviously, between traffic reports. Busy on
they must do that,
Here's
the Lionsgate Bridge is backed up. Here's an excess.
That's right. That's right. Do
you
still listen to radio? Does it interest you? Are you
I'm still like a big part, I moved to LA 14 years ago. I came out here to Los Angeles. I've had the honor of working with the Jack station here. We just lost through moving on, but we had Kevin Weatherly, who was a program director here, and it was awesome to be able to work it was awesome to be able to work in a market like LA with these people. I worked in New York, LA, all these markets with people at some point. So I was attached to the radio. I still am, and I'm still very involved. And uniquely, when we started Jack, you're the only voice on the station, so
Yeah,
you're everything. They got to be topical, and we run it like with music. With instead of music meeting, well, they have maybe those too, but we had writers meetings where instead of having a staff of 6 people be on the air, they would be behind the scenes as writers and come up with ideas and promotions and the imaging and all of that stuff. So
did
um,
you ever
so
listen
it
to?
was cool. I was attached to it. I go into this. I still visit the station. I still go to those meetings sometimes. So I'm still involved in the industry as
Yeah,
much as I can be.
Jack UK, have you ever heard them? You heard their imaging?
It was yeah. They called me when they started that, and they go, "Yeah, we're gonna go with that." And I don't know what they ended up having a announcer name. He was an actor.
Yeah,
He passed
yeah, from
away
Blake
recently.
Seven.
Blake
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
from Blake Seven. What was it? I forget his name, but
same here. Totally
and
different.
he was a great announcer. Listen, I mean, the
Yeah,
guy had amazing pipes. He was a great announcer. But I always thought if you were going to do Jack, and they were nervous, they didn't want a North American voice, and with the humor, they thought maybe that wouldn't have worked in the UK.
yeah,
And I always thought if you were going to hire somebody in the UK to do a Jack format and you couldn't be me, then why not go for more of like a Ricky Gervais kind of guy, um, who's naturally funny and comedic. And that's what I would have done with it. I know Ricky Gervais was probably well beyond that back then, but
well,
something like that, I think.
we tried you when I was in Dublin as well. You might remember that one. And there was myself and a guy called Justin McKenna who were working in promotions and production there. And we said, well, get Howie to do our imaging because they were looking for a new imaging guy. And we just cried laughing every time he brought in the audio because we just loved it. But again, it just didn't fly, did it? It was kind of, I don't know what it was. I don't know what the
Yeah,
problem was.
there's not a lot of guys like me probably walking around Dublin, right? So, or sitting in the pub in Dublin, right? There's not a lot of guys like me.
I
So
know.
I would have to go, have 6 generations go live there for the next 600 years. And then it'll bleed into the culture and they'll go, okay. But it is different. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what would happen if you just plop the Los Angeles version of Jack into Dublin. Maybe it would. Maybe it's well enough executed. It
Yeah,
would work. Maybe I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, Jack is very tricky to do. It's not
yeah,
just telling jokes and saying the name of the station. It's a very deep level of psyche at the radio station. Like the station has a very specific way of thinking and doing. It's a very strong brand, and everything you do sort of has to go through that brand. When they try to roll it out on scale, it doesn't. You got local program director. The guy was at an AC, a classic rock, and half of them don't know what to do half of the time. So you had Jack veer off the rails on many of these markets. It was very specific, and LA really put the stamp on it. We started it in Toronto. The first station was Vancouver, but we did all the creative out of Toronto. Um, they were good at it back then with Rogers, but they didn't quite, they're playing jingles, and in LA, they thought it was a little too hokey. And, what Kevin Weatherly did with it is make it K-Rock cool. He took that culture and coolness from K-Rock in Los Angeles and put that into the Jack brand, and that kind of bled itself out. But there's a lot of guys, man. It was a train wreck in a lot of markets, and I would go on as the voice. I can't tell the program director what to do, but I'm like, dude, good luck, man. You better pack your suitcase because this ain't going to fly. You're missing the whole point, you know?
Howie, we got to go. It's been really nice talking to you. It's nice to hook up again. It's been about 900 years since I last spoke to you.
I know. It's great to see you.
It's been
Great
really
to see
good.
you.
And I don't know whether you've been sarcastic the whole way through or not, and that's what I love about it. So that's great. That's fantastic.
Everything. God damn it. I mean, every word.
Howard Cogan in LA. Thanks for checking in with us.